Professor Ben Anderson is our CEO, and he will speak this morning on the way we want our students to write their proposals and their dissertations.
Thank you for coming around here. I mean, I see some faces that I used to, and then some new faces. I don't think we know Dr. Peter.
Dr. Peter.
Oh man, I know that's Shauna. Isn't that Shauna?
This is Venda.
Venda.
Yeah, it's next to Shauna.
Yeah, it almost sounds Shauna-like.
Correct, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, welcome you, Peter. Carol, I know, and we've met before. I think in the last 6 months, I had several discussions with some of our PhD and master students. And I became more aware of how confusing the research journey can be. And the research journey in itself can be confusing. But I thought we are not participating in a master's or PhD research because we want to be confused. We're doing it because we want to make a contribution to society, and ultimately we want to eloquently present our voice to society. Now, as supervisors, we all play a key role in assisting people in articulating their voice to society. Now, I had a discussion just with one of our master students yesterday, and she intends to work on, let me just get it, on resilience, and she's intrigued with the notion of resilience and the idea of decision making. What worried me about the discussion is that she was not clear in her mind what she wanted to say. She had an idea, coming from a psychological background, that teenagers are not, adolescents are not doing the right things necessarily, and that resilience is, their lack of resilience is impacting negatively on their decision making. What concerned me is that she couldn't have a logical argument with me regarding this matter. So I'm less interested whether she's technically correct in how she answers the PMA, because that's almost a request. Help me to do my PMA. Guide me through this. I am more concerned what is the logical argument that underpins her proposal for the master's or the PhD. And I sometimes wonder if we as supervisors put enough time and energy onto assisting the potential master and PhD candidate how to eloquently articulate their voice. And that's the key thing that I want to present this morning or talk to. How do we caution ourselves of being technically correct, but process almost wise, totally inappropriate? Because that's what I see happening at universities at large. Students register for a master's or a PhD, we give them a research workshop, and then nothing happens. They get stuck, they're confused, they're frustrated, they get anxious. I almost had a sense yesterday that this student was emotional about a discussion yesterday. Now, what are you and I doing to get the individual candidate to a point of understanding what is the real burning issue and desire that they are working with? Now, a simple thing. As an alumnus of Da Vinci, Dr. Levy, may I ask, if I say adolescents are struggling and society is unfair and life is not meaningful, is that appropriate?
Isn't it a generalization?
Is it potentially arrogant?
It could be an arrogant statement of stating what is, but not necessarily, assuming that. And it's not that at all.
And that's what I often see with the students. They talk in absolute terms. They make statements. They don't wish to be arrogant, but they are extremely arrogant. Unknowingly so. Because if you could just have said, the understanding from the researcher is that adolescents could be and seem to, and that it may be. Well, now I'm also getting more ethical. So being arrogant in writing a research proposal and doing research and conducting yourself is an unethical practice, as far as I'm concerned. Just the way you articulate those words. So I also want us at Da Vinci's, and more particularly so with our notion from a two modality to look at social accountability, I don't want us to speak that language. That's a language that needs to be unlearned when I do my research. The more tentative, I almost want to say the more vague you could be, the more respectful I'll interpret your participation. And what are we doing as supervisors and as the institution at large to facilitate that tentativity? Maybe, could, should, not is, and stating them as facts, because they are not necessarily facts. And the fact that another researcher has stated them as facts doesn't mean you have to confirm to that. You could even say, it seems that Levy in his statement about adolescence says the following. It seems. You don't know. Why do you want to know? Why do you want to claim as if you're in charge? So one of the few things, or important things that I think we must try to facilitate in our supervision, try to release the candidate from being so important, from being so arrogant, and in my view, I want to say being unethical. Because if you allow that, you become part of that unethical debate for me. And if I, as an examiner, look at a PhD from another university or a master's, I look very particular at those things. And I can tell you it's rife. You will get it in 95% of theses and dissertations. Because it's almost if we're in a power game and we say, I know, didn't you know? Well, I know. So I wanted to have an opening comment around that. If we talk ethics, it's not a moral issue for me. It's how sensitive are we as supervisors and researchers around what's happening around us. The second thing that our general comment that I want to make is, to what extent are you a facilitator and are you co-creating a new reality with your candidate? To what extent is that happening? Now, to make that happen, I think it assumes, amongst others, that I must have energy. If I don't have the energy and the openness of mind and the awareness, I will not be able to facilitate a co-created reality. I won't. Now, I know in busy lives that we all have, we may say, Ben, that's really great to talk about co-creation, but you know, life is real, and we've got targets to meet, and there's time constraints, so I'd just rather tell them what to do. And that's also okay in some cases. It's not right, but I can understand that it could happen. But do you and I expose the energy to really start providing a momentum to what's happening? Do we elevate the awareness of the researcher to a next level? Or are we just simply ticking the boxes and saying, this looks fine, it seemed to me addressing this matter and this matter, and that's okay? I don't think that should be how we must work. I think we must decide, are we ready to put energy into the system to pull the candidate to a next level of understanding? And I'm not always suggesting that people are ready for that engagement. But I almost want to say at Da Vinci, I am not comfortable if we engage in a reflective practice as a supervisor that just is, almost like a Jungian or a Freudian therapist and say, yes, okay, I think it must be much more than that. I don't think we must be so laid back and just let the candidate go, because our students, when they come to me, they tell me they don't know where to go. So if I, as the supervisor, then just sort of become reflective in the sense by saying, okay, maybe, yes, it doesn't help them. It doesn't help them to co-create a new reality. If you were in a mode 1 modality, as supervisors at Da Vinci, well, that's okay. then you really don't need to do much more. You could just say, yes, what about it? But we in mode 2, we are putting it out there that we want to co-create a new reality, that we want to challenge the notions around social accountability, that we are contributing to the candidates' professional development, that we will challenge them for a transdisciplinary engagement, that we will respect different voices. Those are the core tenets of being at Da Vinci. I am sometimes concerned, and I'm currently working with a PhD candidate that the research officer has referred to me, that almost have a singular voice. There's no heterogeneity in it. There's no transdisciplinary engagement in it. There's very little professional development, and there's hardly any social accountability. So I wish that all of us as supervisors can keep that at the top of mind. How do I then tick, if I have to tick a box, the 5 concepts that underpinned mode 2? Am I on that journey of social accountability? Am I on the journey of heterogeneous engagement? Am I on a journey of facilitating a transdisciplinary discussion? Am I challenging my student to say, have a look at the medical world, what are they doing here? Have a look at the arts world, what are they doing here? Are we asking those discussions? Or are we feeding them more of what we know? So in that sense, being a supervisor, at Da Vinci for that matter, should be an energetic engagement. And I'm very comfortable in saying, I need all the energy of the supervisors to make this work. And the student needs it also. If the students don't get your energy, well, then they could really have done it at UJ or Blitz or Tuckies. Because those institutions don't have the time to spend time with their students. They tell that to us. We see it in the, I don't know if you saw the latest report from the department. They tell that the universities don't have time for them. And that's almost a journey of, well, you have to survive and then you must make your research come out. That's not what we want here. If that implies that we need to take on less students at Da Vinci, then we will do that. Then we take on less students. But I don't want people to feel that they go through a journey of they've got a proposal and they want to get a doctorate or they want to get a master's and they just go through the hoops. You know, I don't think we must do that. So it's about engagement. It's really about engagement. I thought as part of this introduction that I wanted to talk to you about a few basic concepts, and they're so basic that they may even irritate you. But let me try. When I get to the point of sitting in the final assessments of some of the PhDs, there are some basic things lacking. The candidates struggle to talk about their philosophical frame. They almost, in many cases, I must admit, have no philosophical frame that grounds them. There's no frame that grounds them. They haven't articulated it. There's just no frame. Now, if I look at many theses and masters, there are no philosophical frames. So I'm not saying that's a requirement. I know that's not a requirement at most universities. But I can also say, in my own experience, the benefit that it does bring to a researcher, a novice researcher, which all of the masters and PhDs are, if they do articulate a philosophical or theoretical framework within which they will ground their research. Now at Da Vinci, one of the frames that many students choose, and I'm not sure it's because, Johan, they understand it or it's because purely it's available, is the notion of systemic thinking. Because systems thinking does allow for, in a certain way, a framework to be easily accounted to. Because you talk about the interrelatedness of things, you talk about the relationships, the unintended consequences, and you can account for those fairly easily. But that's just one frame. If you juxtaposition that with the frame, the Knieven framework of Snowden, that gives you a total different picture. which is the known, the knowable, the complex, and the chaotic. But how beautiful does a study become when a candidate can account themselves against a philosophical frame? Now, I must admit, they don't need to choose what is available on the market and what is already published. Maybe they want to define their own philosophical frame. Be my guest. Be my guest. Choose any frame. But ground your argument at the end of your research against that frame. Let me assess you against your frame of thinking. Now, even if you chose socialism as an example, as a theoretical frame, so let it be. So what are the principles underlying socialism? It's X, Y, and Z, the 8 things. But then I want you, throughout the journey of your research, I want you to account to those underlying principles. So it gives you almost like an anchor. And so I'm busy with my literature review, and as far as the literature is concerned, it seems that there's support for my idea of having socialism as a framework of engaging my research for the following 3 reasons. I may also say, well, having concluded my literature chapter or chapters, it seems that there are no support for the notion of a socialist framework for conducting my research. So it's not about what's right, but it's how do you allow the candidate to create a rich argument for what they are busy doing in their research. So philosophical frames or theoretical frames for researchers, I think, can be an important value add. And because we are talking about co-creating new realities and that we are questioning the status quo, I would like people, and I would like the supervisors in particular, to facilitate that understanding. Now, you may have your own frame. And in your supervision practice, I think it's important that we state it clear, this is my frame of thinking. But I don't necessarily want the candidate to do what I do. But let them know you are. Because even that in itself, from a supervisor process, will have a rich engagement. So I come from this philosophical frame, and you come from the other. What does that mean? That in itself must create a wonderful engagement. Can I ask a bit around this philosophical frame? Johan, do you think it's important?
Yeah, I think so. I think it can enrich. It brings a richer experience to the research practice, and I think it will help if there are different views and perspectives that people could. Even the facilitator, it's a discovery journey for the supervisor as well. So you can also grow by being confronted with a different theoretical framework from the student's perspective. And I think it's important that they need to be able to discover their journey against that and even critique their own research against that, or to say how it is being facilitated or grounded within their theoretical framework. I think it just brings a richer experience to
But can I ask you this? If we have to ask today to everyone who's in the room, tell us what is your theoretical framework. Do you think we've got that?
I don't think so.
No, we don't. And that's okay. But I almost want to say our opportunity to supervise a Da Vinci student also allows that opportunity to say, who am I in this discussion? What is my theoretical framework? What is my grounding?
Yeah, I just need to check this philosophical framework. Are we talking about my individual philosophical view of the world, or does it relate directly to my research topic?
No, your philosophical view about the world. I think humans are inherently wicked, and that there's conspiracy about everything, and that the world is in any case going to come to an end because from a Christian religion point of view, the Bible says so. That's me, if it's me. Hopefully that's not me, but that could be me.
Yeah.
But then you also, once you start doing your research, you've got your own view, your own reality. Put your research topic within a certain reality.
Well, you see, Marty, if we're true to ourselves, And it's broader than just an ontological perspective. It's also embracing a philosophical frame. So it's almost an extension of the ontology that you may have. If you have your philosophical frame, it in a sense makes it so easy. Because you now become accountable towards your own voice. So currently, we get students concluding their research or conducting their research. And then they get into an assessment space. And then we assess them against what? Again, I assess you against my philosophical frame. We just don't say it, but we do it. Now, if we put a candidate in a position where they've articulated where they come from, and Carl challenges me in an assessment from a total different philosophical point of view, then I, as the candidate, can have an argument with him. But if I don't have a frame, I can have no argument. I'm just a little puppet. That's all.
I think that, in my experience, even locating that theoretical framework is only the first sort of thing. What I find students find difficult is to embed that in their research through in its entirety. So what is the consequence of this theoretical framework for my methodology, extending from ontology and so on. So they not only find it difficult to locate themselves in a particular framework, and various kinds of frameworks allow for have different kinds of benefits and drawbacks, but extending that in their research, and I think that's the important thing and they're missing.
Well, and I think you're 100% right, Elman. I can put it this way. I think it's reality. In my experience of the last 15 years, people have very few have got a grounding and know who they are. They're really just puppets in a world that tell them who they should be. So that's okay. So if you're the supervisor and you realize that the candidate is like a little boat on an ocean, you're not there to change it. But then keep up the mirror and let them see the little boat on the ocean. So what's the framework then? The ocean is their framework. But you will have to have that discussion as a supervisor and say, so let's define what frames you. How do you think about this? How do you do this? What is your sense about this? How do you interpret this? You'll have to ask those important but difficult questions, because you can then co-create and construct their reality. So you say, Thabo, it therefore seems to me that you really are bounded into cultural frame. You really believe culture is meaningful. You also believe that the voice of one is not important. You also seem to embrace the idea that lawlessness is okay and that it's circumstantial, and therefore you embrace, without knowing it, a pragmatic frame of thinking. So Thabo didn't know that's his frame. But in your discussion as a supervisor, you realize that is his frame. And he doesn't need to seek any other frame. Let that then be his frame. Because it's not that they don't know how to do it. They are doing it in any case. But they're not necessarily doing it against an articulated frame. They're just doing it. Well, you as the supervisor and I as the supervisor must have the eloquence of extracting that frame. And so, here's the mirror, John. It seems to me the following three things. In the last, and if we have discussions with our students, it should happen. In the last 5 discussions we had, I think there are 4 themes. So that seems to be important for you. And until they don't choose a specific other frame, Carl, that's their frame. And that's fine. There's no right or wrong frame. That's their frame. But as a supervisor, I've seen it in my research, if you don't get that point clarified, you work with a little boat on a big ocean. And depending who they talk to the next day, they go to that way and the other way and the other way. And they never conclude their journey of research. And that's why I believe that such a small percentage of people, especially at the Masters and PhD, conclude their studies. Because they don't know who they are. They love to serve you and they love to serve you. They serve everything but who they are. And then they get confused. So, as Simon may have sensed in the past years, I actually am okay in confusing students. Because you can only get confused if you are confusable. So be confused until you're not confused. It sounds a bit harsh. All right, so I would like to see that we as supervisors are clear about our frames, and it's not imposing it on anybody, but at least solicit what is their frame. And it doesn't mean it's written in a book. It may just be, as I said, the 4 or 5 things that are themes in their lives. And if that's how unarticulated they are, you have to work with it. I work with it. Just work with it. But you have to work with it, and they have to be aware of it. And then ask them for every chapter, when they write their thesis and as they build their argument, reflect on this. How does it talk to this? And you may even then get that the byproduct of research can become that they actually walk away with a theoretical frame, a philosophical frame, when they conclude their studies. In some research, I've seen that has been the most beneficial. Not the outcome of the research, but that they found their own voice. That's what it's about. What are you and I doing to assist somebody to articulate their voice? There's nothing as powerful as me having a voice. Any comment?
In particular, I've seen it more so for the need for this framework for PhDs, especially where you need to be, when you come to the section of what does the research contribute. So if it's not grounded on a framework, then it lacks the depth. And as such, if you are going to be marked by internationals, you'll find that they will bring it back to say it doesn't have depth. And the depth, you get it by the mixture from the literature review with the framework.
Yes.
So that now the objectives of the research are embedded there in the framework.
I can't say it better. I've experienced it recently with one of our students who completed with me on RPL. The strength of her thesis is that she was very clear in what is a philosophical understanding and framework. And if you read the thesis, it reads, it's got a logical build. I could have questions about the depth of the research, but the depth of articulating the voice is what made the convincing argument. It's about your voice. And I find many PhDs voiceless, if I may. I engage with people who've got doctorates that are voiceless. It's sad. Don't let it happen to us. The next piece I want to talk about is the idea, and it builds a bit to this, is the idea of the ontology and epistemological perspectives. And I think, Marty, you may be talking about it later today more. I again want to argue, I would like us to be clear on articulating those two perspectives in the research process. It relates to what I've been talking now, but it does give you a grounding of where do you come from and how do you observe the world. So these things has got an interplay with each other. But I think we must take away the mystical understanding of it and just make it clear, who are you and how do you look at the world around you? Those are almost the two questions. Who am I and how do I look at the world around me? So I'm not going to belabor that point, just to say that I think it is important. Now, then it gets to the notion of, do I write in the first person, the I, or the researcher, or whatever. I don't want to have a big debate around that, because I think that's a personal choice. I just want to share this. When we write in the I, in the first person, I have experienced more often than not that somewhere the student gets almost derailed in wanting to write a novel. The I has got the potential of becoming very emotive and very novelish. Write a book. And believe me, many people have got the dream of writing a book. So when you allow them to go into the I, and I'm seeing it now again with the student that you referred to me, it becomes novelish. I'm writing a book. You are not writing a book. You are writing an argumentative thesis. So if you as a supervisor want to embrace the I, that's fine. I've read very few PhDs, especially at the PhD level. At the masters, I even find it more difficult if it's in the I, to be quite honest. If you want to do that, that's fine. I'm just saying, in my experience, they become novelish. It's as if you read a book. But the argument, I'm not sure. And I don't know why. It's almost, I believe in as a psychologist, in the therapist space, it's very powerful if you can detach you and allow you to look from outside to yourself. It brings a sense of objectivity. And that little distance just allows you to see more than when you would sit inside yourself and talk about yourself. So maybe that's, Carl, why I feel about that. Because I've seen in therapy how powerful it is if I can kneel just to look a meter away and say, Neil, sit here and look at Neil. He sees often much more than what he sees if he talks about Neil from inside. And I see that in the research, unfortunately. The eyes, very novelish. Don't know if there's any comment. Linda?
I think it speaks to what you were saying earlier, that at this level, master's or PhD, when you use the I voice, it almost speaks to arrogance, because I don't believe at that point one has gone deep enough into the topic to be able to say, I have researched, and this is what I've actually come up with, and I. That might come later as they write papers.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting perspective. So it's almost, if you say, if at the end it morphs into an I, it may be more impactful. Because then the I will be the voice that came out.
Yes.
But so it's not a hard, fast rule, Johan, but that's my experience. I don't know what's your experience.
I'm surprised by the topic, because my understanding has always been it's an absolute no to write in the eye, especially at this level. So what you're saying is it is actually happening.
Yeah, it is. And it's globally a practice. You see it happening more and more. So it's not about that it's wrong anymore.
Yeah.
I'm just saying I find it complicated. It adds a complexity that if you want to go to the eye, that's great, but you'll have to have guts to manage that so that it doesn't become novelish, from my perspective.
Just to add on that, on the I think most of the trends nowadays, it's like a no, you know. You need to have to impersonalize the whole thing, you know, because for masters and PhDs, until they have been awarded, they do not own an opinion. So based on that, it means they need to be impersonal, you know, just you know, walk away from that, you know, just infer. You don't own an opinion until you are published.
And I think that's part of the dilemma. I think there's a shift happening in society that people say, well, I have an opinion. Now, as a Motu entity, we want to allow people to have their opinion. So we're crossing the line a little bit there. But then the I find, becomes noise for me. I'm just honest. It's very noisy. It's very novelish. Neil?
I just want to say my observation is impartiality is important, self-observation. So if I take it from what I did in second order cybernetics, the concept of distancing yourself as a consumer and seeing how you would behave
Getting
in
the
a
meta
certain
frame.
situation. Yes. And you, as you say, you observe the person who's making that purchase decision and you see, wow, I'm starting to uncover the way I feel, the way I think, how I behave. But that person who's me is actually at a distance. And now I gain a greater insight or understanding. It's almost like you can describe water, but until you feel it, you can't experience it. You have to get into it. And that's for me what the framework does, that distancing and that observation, it allows you to experience it.
Okay. So there are perspectives around this. You must make up your own voice around that. But I just thought I want to raise that because I see it as almost, Marty, as a little bit of a trend.
Yes,
coming
well,
out.
I agree. As social researcher, I agree that in some cases you can use I. And that is to get that burning desire. I found during research they can't find that. And the easiest way they can find it is by getting back into the
themselves.
self. But it's not that everybody should use it. If you can use it, it has meaning.
But what Marty will also tell you, where she's got the eyes strongly, we had serious challenges. Because you almost can't get it at a logical level. That's you almost, if you struggle to get to the logic of it, it gets confusion there. It gets very warm and fuzzy, you know, especially if they want to write these theses which is just a one case study. You know, I mean, that thing goes back and forward because you can't get the argument. You get the person, but it's almost as if the person is in the way. You just see the person all the time. You don't see the research.
One more way where you do use it is in autoethnography. There you can't get away from it.
Well, I want to say yes and no, because I can still be the researcher in that frame, in that methodology. I think we just like to think, oh, now I can talk about me. But when I talk about the researcher, I don't think it disallows to have the third person there. People just choose it, and it's tricky. I can tell you those autoethnographic methodological engagements have been tricky across the board. You go to universities, you would see that's where you got queries about reviewing and reassessing and people questioning. It's tricky. So you can go into that space. But I'm just saying, you must have guts, brother and sister, to be in that space.
But we do allow.
We do allow, as we allow everything. Okay, then I spoke about the theoretical frame, the title of the study, then the aim and objectives. Now this sounds so almost, basic. But I seem to find in the last 15 years in my engagement with research, if a candidate at both the master's and PhD level is not able to articulate the aim and objectives, the study just seemed not to hang together. And I see it with the research challenges or students that are not successful that Matti refers to me, without exception, they don't know what's the aim and objective. They just speak glibly about it. They will use things interchangeably, the purpose of the research and the objective of the research and the goal of the research and the aim, and they will use all those words in the same thesis. And then I say, so what is the aim of this study? And then they can't really tell you. So you and I as supervisors have to assist people to be clear and very, very, very eloquent in saying, this is the aim and these are the supporting objectives. Because similarly, as with the philosophical framework, I believe your great theses and dissertations are those who on a chapter by chapter or a section by section, whatever you use, refer back to the aim and the objectives. Because all that you do, you're building a thesis. Now that's your scope of work. Don't talk to me about other things out there. Talk to me about the aim and objectives. How does everything that you capture in your thesis and in your dissertation relates to the aim and objectives? That's all that I'm interested in. Because if it's not there, then you're writing, in my mind again, we're back to the novel. Any questions around that?
Yesterday, I've been given this master student to sort of like co-supervise with Prof. Nina. And so yesterday she came to see me, and one of the things that I gathered, she was all over the place. So what had value for her is to actually synchronize her study and her thinking simply and say, what is the goal, what is the objective, what are you trying to achieve overall? And then we had to identify there was no specific African leadership style, and she had to say, well, that would be her argument. Is there or isn't there? And I think you have to put in the mind of the student that question of simplicity. That's what I gathered from that meeting with her.
Very important. I mean, we saw it in yesterday's discussion. The student's got an idea, but there are many ideas. But she doesn't have a clear goal or an aim or a purpose. And therefore, there are no articulated objectives. Because if your aim and your goal are clear, you can define the objectives. Therefore, what are the underpinning realities that's going to assist me in achieving that aim? Now, I know it sounds a bit structured, but for purposes of getting people to conclude their studies, I can't see that it can do any harm. If they want to deconstruct it at the end when they do the final writing up, that's okay. But I think as supervisors, we should take them on that journey of simplifying what is the aim, goal, or the aim or the goal, whatever you want to use, and what are the supporting objectives. Elmo?
Yeah, I think that they also need to argue their objectives. That's what is important to me. That they don't just need to state their objectives, because I want to see how that ties up into achieving the goal or the aim then.
But Elmo, to be honest, if I formalize my objectives appropriate, the logic will tell you how it will fit in. So therein lies the argument. So if I have an aim and I've got an objective that when you as the reader read it and you can't make the link, then that objective is indeed not well articulated. But it can be a simple sentence, and I would say, oh, I can see the link. So if my aim is like yesterday's, to look at, what was it? Resilience and decision making, something I can't get in adolescence. The objective of the supporting objectives was to understand the historical development of resilience. I can see the link. So they want to say, when I've achieved that understanding, I will be able to get more insight into my aim.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is it depends on, there are many ways to drive to Cape Town, or you can fly to Cape Town. So you don't have to travel to all the places in between. So the argument here needs to be said, why am I taking this route? And the arguments, the objectives by themselves might all be logical, but I mean you can't have 12 objectives. You must choose those objectives that in your study and your purpose and your questions you believe take you to that place. And
I think,
that's where the argument comes
yeah,
in.
and I think what I see, if people are well articulate in the purpose of the study, and they then set out the aim or the goal, then the objectives are easily understood. So you similarly can't set an aim and a goal if you haven't set out the purpose. Because it's purpose, aim and goal and objectives. They always sequentially work like that. But that's a little exercise that we as supervisors have to, again, be very focused around.
Can I just add on the objectives? Also, sometimes people look at the objectives as an entire different study even. So one has to determine, is this not such a big objective that it's in actual fact a different study? The whole history of resilience, for instance. I mean, is that plausible? What kind of study is it? Is it a master's? Is it a doctorate? So just be cautious around that. So they are not doing 3-4 studies. So that's why the aim again is really important. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions on this? Good. I then want to talk a little about the notion of the research question and the hypothesis. Marty and I have debates around this because in my own experience, I don't think that either the research question or the hypothesis is that important. But I know it must happen, but I don't know whether it's that important. I'm not sure whether I think students get confused when we ask them what's the research question. They think, and I saw it yesterday again, they think that's the question that they're going to ask the participants in their research. Well, they don't know what's the question then, because they don't know what they're going to ask them. What I sense is they've got an idea. I've got an idea that resilience and decision making and adolescent behavior have got something to do with each other. I only have an idea. I don't have a clue. Just got an idea. And in that sense, that candidate is not able to formalize a hypothesis. She can, her brain can do it. But on what grounds is she formalizing that hypothesis? That's almost arrogant. She doesn't know. So she's just got an idea. That's all. So when we ask people to formalize the question, I'm still questioning whether we should ask that. Because in all honesty, in my research, I had no question. If you had asked me what's the question, I have got no question. I had an idea.
But I feel that depends very much whether you're following a positivist or an interpretivist approach. And I found many times with the ESCOM students, they're positivists. And to help them to focus, they have to ask a question. Rather than with a goal, and you can follow into your interpretive.
But you see why I'm asking that, Marty, is because we want to give them a submission guideline. Now, if I don't work in that philosophical frame, then I don't have a question. And I also don't have a hypothesis. So we have to allow for all the possibilities.
Yes.
Because currently we only allow for the question and the hypothesis.
Oh.
Yes. And I'm saying, well, maybe it can't just be that. It must probably be, what's your idea or question? And if you then want to put hypothesis, because if you were quantitative, you could say, add that there. But I think as supervisor, we must broaden our thinking there and not force the student into a hypothesis or a question or an idea and just say, well, you must choose, yes, but there's a scope of which you can choose from. So I just think we must broaden that. That is not just a question or a hypothesis, can also just be an idea. Now I see in our PMA we say research questions or hypotheses.
I don't know which one was the.
PMA 1.
They should be.
Yeah, so I think we must just look at that it's idea, question and hypothesis as options.
Yes.
All right. Now, you would see in the an attempt to assist the supervisors, Marty and them will talk to you today, we have now formalized the proposal in much more detail. So that by the time you and I are appointed as a supervisor, the ontology and epistemology clarified. So you receive a student that have spoken about that. You receive a student who have contextualized their research. You receive a student who have clarified the domain or the problem. You receive a student that have underpinned the assumptions, already clarified them. You receive a student whose theoretical framework is stipulated. You receive a student who've got a title as tentative as it may be, who have defined the aim and objectives, who've defined the idea and the question and the hypothesis, who have defined, importantly so, the research methodology, and who have clarified the scope of research. What happened until now, we received students who have not done that. And so what happened is, most of the proposal was all redone with the support of the supervisor. Now the research office is driving this process. So that by the time we receive them as supervisors, all of that work has been done. So I hope that will help in going forward. Just the last one I want to address on this is the notion of the research framework or methodology. And let's talk about that. I find it intriguing that some supervisors do not expect a candidate to articulate their methodology. They write the thesis or the dissertation, but they go from the literature review and the context immediately into the fieldwork. How does that work? Neil?
I think there should definitely be a logical structure. If you have that, there's no synchronicity, there's no synergy. So it's got to be a build-up. The research has to reinforce the question, it has to reinforce what's in the literature review, and it has to lead on to the recommendations. And if there's a gap, there's something missing.
But do you think we do enough to stipulate the methodology?
Not at all.
And saying my intent is, so you almost, I can't see differently, you write it in a futurist term. You say, I intend to go out here and to walk down the stairs and to go around the building and to drink water and to enter at the back. That's your intended methodology, if you wished. But I may walk out here, and as I walk down the stairs, when I'm in the field, I decide to turn left and not right and go into the back door. So I want to see, ideally in a good thesis and a dissertation, what was your intended methodology? And what did you actually do? And these two doesn't need to be the same. They can actually be totally, you could even get to a point of saying, well, I chose not to go down the stairs, but to go down the passage for the following reasons. You have to argue it. But I find a lack there that we tend not to get the students to articulate the intended methodology. And then ultimately what I see is, what happens is a number of our students actually just do a project. Because there's not a methodology, a research methodological underpinning, it's actually just a project. And that's worrying. That is worrying. Research method is a science that's been developed over a long period of time. And I hope that from Da Vinci's side, we can inform you of more of that, and that you can inform us of methodological engagements. But I think we must give them the whole spectrum to choose from and say, here's the spectrum. Choose how you want to play. But don't tell me, as they often do, I'm going to do mixed method. Because that's the quick one. I'm going to do mixed method. And what it actually means, I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to run my little project the way I want to run it. But I'm not accountable. Now, that's not the intention of mixed method. But unfortunately, that's how it plays out. I want to do it my little way. But I'm not accountable in terms of research frames and data collection, methodologies and analysis. No, don't speak me that language. That's just too complicated. Well, that's part of research methodology. So I would like us all, with the support of the research office and also with your own support towards us, let's create a rich basket of Lego blocks around available research methodologies. And let's introduce it to students because they won't know. And let them choose and then write in the future, how am I intending to apply this methodology? That's a chapter. That's a piece on its own. And then when they write the research report, they will reflect on what did they do and what did they not do. Because that shows me the rigor of the researcher. But now I've got no template or background or backdrop or frame to assess the student. So, to close, if I don't know your ontology and I don't know epistemologically how you look at the world, and I don't know what's your theoretical framework, and I do not know what is your research methodology, you disallow me as the examiner to assess you. Because I don't know who I'm talking about to. I don't know who I'm talking to. Because there's nothing. Because all that's there then, there's just capturing of data of what people said out there. So all that I can then do, I can assess you against how you are aligned to what other people have said. And that's problematic.
I just want to say also, I think it's important to create understanding so that people understand what your argument is, where you're coming from, how you interpret it,
Yes.
what your recommendations are. So you have to put people in the light. You have to show them this is what I'm doing and inform them.
And even more so because we claim that we want to talk about social accountability and professional development and all those things that relate to Mode 2. So I can't not want to listen to your ontology and your epistemology and your philosophical frame and your methodology. Those are the 4 building blocks. So when we engage with our candidates, I hope that all of us as supervisors can at least adhere to those 4 things. Because then I think we are taking the student on a rich journey. Any questions, Carl?
Yes, maybe do have a question. In terms of Da Vinci PhD students, what percentage of students actually complete?
Well,
I'm
Karen
going
is
to talk about that now.
She's going to talk about that.
All right, there we go. Because just based on everything that you've said over here, it just raises the
We're doing
question.
well.
Yeah.
We're doing well.
Okay, are you doing well? Yeah.
But we want to do much better.
Yeah.
We don't start a PhD journey or a master's not to complete. That's not okay. And unfortunately, historically in the country and globally, people start a master's and a PhD predominantly not to complete it. Predominantly.
They started for the wrong reasons.
So how do we
They
work?
want the title.
Yes. So how do we work with the wrong reason and morph that into something beautiful? That's what we want to say. It's okay that you start with the wrong reason, but how do we now get you away from that? With difficulty.
Yeah.
It's not okay to start for the wrong reason.
That's reality, bro. Okay. Any other questions? Martin?
not at this stage. What I perhaps could say is we put a lot into these workshops now, and a lot of emotion as well with the students, and we want to see them finishing. So, and we've gone through a few now with the examinations, 2 or 3, that haven't made it. And it's like a personal failure that we see.
So if the student doesn't make it, do they get a second go at it?
Yes.
Yes, they do.
Okay.
But really more important, the CHE took a decision, no PhD supervisor can give a score anymore. So when we allow that candidate and we sign off and say to the research office, this candidate is ready, then we can't do anything
That's
anymore.
the academic supervisor, not
And
the
the field.
And the
And-
field.
Yes, both must sign it off. And if they said yes, you are saying, I can now attach my name to it and I can send it overseas and somebody can assess it. Because this, and maybe that's the point I didn't focus that much on, this is a contribution to the global space. Because that's key. The PhDs must have a global relevance and the masters must have a national relevance. But once you sign it off, once you and I sign it off as supervisors, then it goes into the external examiner field and then we can do nothing about it. When the external examiner fails it, it will come back to us.
And even then, we still give them a chance. Because one of our PhDs is now working with the external examiner to finish.
I'm just saying, I'm finding it weird if, like, the international world can fail the student while the two supervisors have concurrently agreed that.
Yes.
Because basically, you stand for, the only difference is that you're not in the international space, but the knowledge, all that is needed to pass the student, all the elements, you should have imposed them. So I don't see it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, and I think that's why we're giving structure to this. Because we're not like a residential university where we all sit in offices as professors and just do research. We're all busy professionals out there. And that's why I decided give more structure to it. Because if you comply, for lack of a better word,
Yes.
to those things, your student won't fail.
This is what I'm saying.
Yes. But I had to take those out because when I looked at some of the work, I saw that's not in there. So that unfortunately happens, and the task of Marty's office is to ensure that we do not allocate students to such supervisors. Maybe they can do other great things at Da Vinci, but they shouldn't supervise students. We really need a cohort of supervisors that are excited about the idea of research
Yes.
and to make that the focus. And not a question doing an interesting project. Because what happens now with the assessment and the quality assurance, they can pass through all the hoops with their supervisor. But you can't get past the examination system. I will be very embarrassed if my student fails.
Definitely.
How important is it for the supervisor, be that the academic or field supervisor, to be passionate about the topic of the student?
I would say yes and no. If you're a Motu thinker and you're transdisciplinary engaged, I can get engaged about anything because it's my brain.
Yeah.
So it's the whole idea, do you have the mental capacity conceptually? Then I can be excited about everything. Even if it's not my field. And we hope that between the two supervisors that will be covered.
Yeah.
As long as it's feasible, the research
Yeah.
is feasible.
Prof, another thing that could help, is how about benchmarking? Like you need to benchmark with the rest of the world. So how do they look? How do they mark a PhD student's work? So that now, when you are local, you think local but act, global. So that you must be carrying like the other universities. Then when you look at your student, you breathe that spirit into the paper.
I think we are not there yet, to give you an honest answer. I think part of the work that the engagement manager is going to do is to get the voices of those external examiners and talk more and see what is it, that interests them.
Yes.
What I do find, and this maybe is not a proper answer, is if we go to the West, if we go to America, and we choose American examiners, the student most probably will pass. And I don't know what that says. If you go north, the student may not pass. But if you go west, they may pass. Just an observation that I've made. And I think part of it is maybe, if you look at it, the American psyche is very much a pragmatic psyche. So if it's pragmatic and it makes pragmatic sense, the external examiner from America would say, this is good. And that's not wrong. But just to answer you, we don't know that detail yet. We have to build it.
because that will save us a lot.
Yeah. And I think, Karen, we've had that discussion, how they must look at that.
So
All right.
Naive question from my side. So how does the external examiner then get identified? Subject matter experts?
Subject matter experts, we look at what those people have published, where they're involved professionally, and we then search those people to participate.
So Da Vinci themselves
Yes.
will identify
Yes.
the external
Yeah.
examiner.
And they must be academically inclined
Yeah.
as well.
And we had, we've got, life is interesting. We also have had some supervisors colluding, is that too strong a word?
Yes.
Okay, but can I use it?
You can use it.
Okay. Colluding with external examiners without us knowing it. That was quite problematic. So it's a tricky space. Us as people are funny. We do strange things. But the supervisor, I as a supervisor, should have no contact to with the external examiner. That's actually an ethical requirement in research. But then we had some supervisor that just called the external examiner and said, no, you don't know what you're talking about. This is how it works. But we are managing all of that kind of engagement.
We will talk more about the engagement between the supervisor and the students, and perhaps then discuss more of these questions as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.